Welcome back to the Popped Podcast, where we uncover real, raw, and rarely discussed truths about pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and beyond. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Muery, prenatal and postpartum chiropractor, birth doula, and founder of Move Moms at Move Chiropractic Boulder. Today, I'm sure you know by the title of this episode that we are diving into a really fascinating yet highly misunderstood event that can happen during birth, which is the fetal ejection reflex. If you've never heard of the fetal ejection reflex, or all you have ever thought about birth is pushing or counting to 10 or using all your might and all your muscles to push your baby out, this is going to flip that script or rewrite that perspective for you. Maybe you've experienced this yourself and you want to understand more about what happened. We're going to dive into all of how this actually occurs and how you can bring it on. So let's start with a simple definition of the fetal ejection reflex, or FER. I'll use those interchangeably. It's an automatic physiological response when the body takes over and expels the baby before you actively push or without being coached into pushing. So this is involuntary and not always before. So let me rewind. This doesn't always happen before you actively push. This can happen though before you get the chance to be coached or think about pushing. It is involuntary, it's forceful and often rapid, where the uterus and hormones override the body's control and expels the baby out without any active effort. So if you can picture yourself or a mom laboring, they're fully dilated, they're laboring with hard contractions, they're coming quicker, they're longer, they're fully effaced, all the things. And before someone says push, or without someone coaching push, or mom actively thinking I need to push, the baby comes out all of a sudden. It's wild. It rarely happens in highly managed births, but it can happen. And it is completely natural. It just has to happen when the conditions are perfectly met or perfectly aligned. So how does this actually happen? This is the mechanics, my favorite part. Obviously, I love the science and the anatomy of how this actually happens. But first, we have an oxytocin surge and an adrenaline withdrawal. So the oxytocin surge, the oxytocin is the hormone that is going to induce the contractions within labor. When we are going throughout labor and when we're undisturbed, the oxytocin can surge at its highest peaks during transition or during that time when you have the urge to push, which we'll come back to. So, oxytocin will come throughout labor and birth, but it will have its biggest surge around transition and the actual pushing out of baby, or rather not pushing out of baby. The adrenaline withdrawal. So a birthing mom needs to feel safe consistently to have low levels of adrenaline or low levels of stress within their body. And whether that's environmental, whether that's personnel that's around them, smells, time of day, a lot of things go into what makes mom feel safe during birth. We'll get into that more too. But this adrenaline withdrawal will happen when a mom feels completely safe and they're in their most primal parasympathetic state. All of that adrenaline will withdraw from the body, and the mom actually goes into this activated expulsive reflex. So, this explosive reflex activation, this is happening at the peak intensity. So, this is where oxytocin is surging, adrenaline is dropping, but the body is in its peak of labor. This expulsion reflex overrides the mom's control to push. So there's an urge to push where you can control whether you push with that urge or where you don't push with that urge. This is beyond that control. You cannot stop this. This is happening without control. It is triggered. Once this is triggered, it could happen, your baby could be expelled from your body within one contraction. It could happen within a couple contractions, but it usually happens pretty quick once we're in this ideal state of high oxytocin, low adrenaline, and the expulsive reflex is activated. This only happens when moms are in a really safe birthing environment, or where they feel really safe in the environment that they're birthing in. So we'll go through those keys, but some basic ones we could start with here are dim lighting, less interruptions, less disruptions of people coming in and out of the room, privacy, that goes hand in hand with that, or with people coming in and out of the room, warmth, actually feeling warm. Obviously, this is a very physical event, so you'll be sweating. Even if you're sweating, we need to make sure the environment is still warm and that we're not just blasting the AC. As comfortable as that can feel sometimes, it can often turn off this reflex. So keeping the place warm, or where mom is birthing, keeping that area warm. Whether they're in the tub, maybe that's where their warmth is, a warm tub. And then position changes. We'll get into that more as well. That comes more with instinctive position changes rather than coached positions. So now that we kind of know how FER happens, the biggest, like I said at the beginning of this episode, it's really fascinating, but it's highly misunderstood. So if you go to Google and you Google fetal ejection reflex, you're probably going to find a lot of confusion. So let's break down some of that confusion right here. First, this is the biggest misconception I see, that it's the same as pushing. Like I've already laid out, this is not the same as pushing. This is beyond pushing. This is beyond the control that you will have within your body. This is, and I'm speaking more specifically for unmedicated births, you're going to have a real lack of control in your body when we have medication or interventions throughout the birth, where the rhythm of your body contracting in labor is not with the rhythm of the medication that's helping you continue through that laboring process. So this is not the same as pushing. Pushing is often coached. Even if it's not coached, it's thought about. It's often like, okay, I'm going to push on this next contraction, or sometimes it's not coached specifically, but that's what comes out like on this next contraction. Use your strength and energy to see if you can push like you're bearing down or trying to poop. Not the same. This is going to be involuntary. In fact, let's just dive deeper into the difference between the urge to push and the actual fetal ejection reflex. So the urge to push can happen even in women who don't experience the fetal ejection reflex. I've heard a lot of moms, as soon as I felt the urge to push, yada, 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 that a lot of women still experience this urge to push. This is not the same as the fetal ejection reflex. The urge to push, you can control whether you push with that urge or whether you don't push with that urge. And this is typically happening when you get that urge to push. This is typically happening when baby's descending down into the birth canal. So they're putting pressure on all of the tissues around, specifically the rectum, where you feel like you're going to have to poop and it feels like you need to push. This is the urge to push, not fetal ejection reflex. Fetal ejection reflex, like we've said, it's completely involuntary. So you can't decide to push. On a contraction, your body is going to push that baby. This is, again, beyond what you can decide or what you can force. It is typically very forceful and very forceful and overwhelming reflex that happens within the body to get this baby out. You literally can't stop it. It happens when the baby reaches peak oxytocin and everything aligns perfectly. So like we said, how this happens is when we have that oxytocin surge, adrenaline withdrawal is low, and the environment is just perfect. Warm, dim lighting, mom feels safe, she's in the right position, usually instinctively, and then we have this. It is rare, like I've said, in medicalized settings, because interventions typically block hormonal or biomechanical rhythms that the mom's body is having, or that would be having without that medication. And so the mom's body is not typically within enough rhythm of the synthetic oxytocin, like Pitocin, or the epidural completely blocks that nervous system communication from lower body to upper body. So there is no rhythmical synchronization there. So often the body can't find that peak level of oxytocin and a very low level of adrenaline in order for this to happen. Not to say that it couldn't happen, but that is typically what happens in medicalized settings. This doesn't tend to reach its peak circumstances for it to happen. Key takeaway: the urge to push is something you can work with. Telling you your baby is ready to come. FER is something that happens through you and through your contractions when the conditions are just right. Okay, second misconception that I often hear: it's super rare and almost never happens. Actually, it is pretty common in undisturbed physiological births. So a lot of birth centers with midwives or home births with midwives, a lot of indigenous cultures who have a less medicalized lens going into pregnancy, labor, birth, postpartum, tend to have this experience more frequently. This is also really common in our ancient ancestry with all of the women that have come hundreds of thousands of years before us. This is way more common. Now that we have more medicalized approaches to help us through labor processes, that help is helpful for other parts of labor, but doesn't tend to help this natural process. So keep that in mind when you're deciding what interventions or trying to build a birth plan of what interventions you're okay with and what you're not okay with. If this is something you're really wanting, interventions have to be little to none of existence within your laboring to have this occur. So keep that in mind. Something to talk about with your birth team, especially if this is something you're really wanting. It's imperative that you talk to your birth team about what the parameters and what the conditions are in the room so that this can occur. Next, we have you need to be trying for this to happen. If anything, if you're trying too hard, this is not going to happen. If you're trying so hard to get to a place or trying so hard to have the right conditions, your mind is stressed already about those conditions trying to happen. You have to limit that stress. So this is going to go different ways depending on your experience and what your path ends up being. So if you're in a space where you can have little or minimal distractions and your conditions are already going to be pretty safe and you're going to feel really normal at home or at the birth center, this is great. This is really likely to happen, but you just don't try now. Now you don't have to worry about it. Now we have to worry about getting your body relaxed during the high intensity contractions for that oxytocin surge and adrenaline drop. The safe space is already there. If you're in a hospital or maybe you get transferred to a hospital for your birth and you're trying so hard to have all of these perfect parameters, the right people, and no, I don't want you in my room, and you're constantly thinking about making the conditions right in the room, a lot of times that's so much stress already on top of what's already happening during labor and birth that your body isn't going to have that oxytocin surge or adrenaline withdrawal. So my encouragement is if you do get transferred to a hospital, have a plan. Have a plan about how you're going to make that room as safe as possible. And that can go back to what I said a few episodes ago, whether that's going to the hospital, a hospital that you might be transferred to prior, just to know your surroundings and know who you're going to meet with and who could be there if you do get transferred there. And then I also highly encourage to have a doula. Bring your doula so that when your doula transfers with you to the hospital, they know your birth plan. They know that you want to have this fetal ejection reflex and they can help facilitate the space and the environment to fit your needs for this experience. if you're already planning on having a hospital birth and you want to experience this, talk to your birth team. Have a printed out clear standard for what you want in and out of your room so that your room stays the same and so that you can maintain that safe feeling. There's no jumps of change in that safeness. Of course, there's always shift changes around 7 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock at night. Sometimes new personnel can shift that safety. Keep that in mind. This is more likely to happen in a non-medicalized environment, more likely to happen at home or at a birth center in dimmer lighting, less chaos. Not that a hospital is always chaos, but to some degree, there's chaos in a hospital. So this can happen. You really do have to think about the parameters to get there. Just don't stress out about it too much because then you won't have it happen. Okay, so last one, and this one's a little lengthy, but it's our last one, is FER, increasing tearing or increasing the risk of tearing. Not totally true, not totally false. So let's see the difference of why FER can reduce the risk of tearing or actually cause tearing. FER is not coached or does not include purple pushing, which is like counting to 10, holding your breath, taking a big breath in, and pushing down for 10 seconds, or being counted down like 10, 9, 8, or 1, 2, whatever it is. Counted pushing, coached pushing, purple pushing, we're not doing that. So FER, because we're not doing that, we're listening to the mom's rhythmical contractions of the body. We're not pushing baby out past that rhythm or outside of that rhythm. So typically this allows a reduced risk of tearing because we're in rhythm with the body's tissues and its connection to the brain during this positive feedback loop. Every time that the baby comes down and puts pressure, it's going to send messages up to the brain, send more oxytocin, stretch more. That's what naturally is happening if your body's in that natural synchronization of labor rhythm for the mom. We also have hormonal lubrication and elasticity. So the body is going to, with that positive feedback loop, immediately send oxytocin and relaxin to soften and lubricate the tissues so that when baby comes through, baby's not ripping or tearing the tissues. This tends to, when mom's in that perfect positive feedback loop, be so perfect that the tissues have stretched and had enough elasticity that when baby comes through, there's no tearing. And then we also have spontaneous positioning. This is moms getting instinctively into positions by their instincts, whether that's hands and knees, all fours, half squat with the leg up. This is where I really encourage moms to focus on their body positions during pregnancy and figure out what positions feel good, what doesn't feel good, and act on that position. So whether you're sitting at your desk at work and you're like, oh, this doesn't feel good, try to find the most comfortable position ever, even if it's the craziest position ever. Try to find that position because you're acting on that instinct or that intuition, and it's only going to build your intuition to be stronger and more prevalent during labor and birth. This instinct is what helps you get into the position your body needs to have the FER or the fetal ejection reflex. Just like we've said, all the conditions have to be perfect. The room is perfect. The people are perfect. The temperature is perfect. Maybe the sound is perfect. Your position is also got to be perfect, but that most commonly comes from instincts. No one position is the perfect position for every mom. Your position could be completely different than anyone else ever. I don't know. It could just be different. Actually, I'll shout out Dr. Elise Rigney. I've heard her speak a couple times. She's a chiropractor here in Colorado. She is awesome. She has multiple chiropractic businesses, but in a few of her talks, she has talked about after coaching many prenatal patients, try positions for laboring or birthing, like on all fours or in a squat, like I just said, where gravity is helping baby come out. And then during her own birth, her body instinctively told her to go on her back, and that's the position she birthed her baby in. So this isn't to say that this positioning or that you have to be on all fours or hands, whatever position to have FER happen. It's just, I'm just pointing out here that it most likely happens with the help of gravity, but more importantly, your intuition and your instinctive position. So listen to that instinctive position. If you really don't know where to go, keep asking, or can we try a new position? You can ask your doula, you can ask midwives, OBs, can we try new positions? But once you have even just a remote, what if I try this position? Try it. Try that position, because that might be the perfect best position for you and your baby to have this reflex work. But again, don't stress out about the position. If you're like, all these positions feel funky and none of them feel good, don't stress out about it. Just keep moving. Because remember, if you're stressing out about anything too much, we're going to turn off the necessary means to have the fetal ejection reflex happen. So, moving on. When tearing can happen with fetal ejection reflex, if the baby is born extremely fast, sometimes the tissues don't have time to stretch and there's some tearing. That's why I said this is kind of like your body does send those hormones to relax. Sometimes it just happens so fast that you don't get enough of those hormones or enough tissue stretching before it happens. That baby comes out and there's some tearing. This can also happen if mom's been in a really tense or high adrenaline, high stress state, and then immediately relaxes and feels safe. Baby can come super quick and boom, we can have some tearing. Okay, for example, some people feel really, really, really safe at the hospital. That is their safe spot. That's where they know they have a medical team, if anything, like that's their safe spot. They know that they are taken care of at the hospital. If you're maybe in the car, an hour drive to the hospital, and you're already in labor, that could be a really high stress state, depending on where you're at in labor. And then all of a sudden you get to the hospital and you feel relaxed and you feel, oh my gosh, thank goodness we're safe at the hospital. That safety, that feeling of safety can immediately boost that oxytocin, drop that adrenaline. And depending on the position you're in, baby could come flying out. So, something to keep in mind. Maybe that happened to you. I would love to know about it. Tell me more. Send me a DM. Tell me all the fetal ejection reflex stories that you have. Okay. Wrapping up on these misconceptions, how FER happens, how can we minimize tearing with FER? What can we do if we're trying to have this reflex, but we're a little bit worried that there could be some tearing? Here's how we minimize that tearing. Let your baby breathe out. So, like I said, there's a positive feedback loop. Your baby's going to contract, or your body's going to contract and push your baby out, not all the way, and then it's going to relax, and then it's going to contract, and then it's going to relax. Especially for first-time moms, your baby is going to breathe out multiple times, usually, before they come out. This breathing doesn't mean that you haven't engaged the fetal ejection reflex or that you're actively pushing, but this breathing out often has to happen for the tissues to stretch enough for the baby to shoot out without tearing. So, if your baby is breathing out, which means they're crowning and then they're kind of coming back in. I'll give a little picture. If you can imagine my hand as the head, they're crowning and then they're coming back in, and then they're crowning and then they're coming back in. They're crowning. If this is happening, support the perineum. So all the tissues surrounding baby's head, you can support that perineum with a warm washcloth, a clean hand. Obviously we're trying to stay as clean as possible, or bacteria free as possible, but allowing the baby to breathe out and supporting the perineum while that happens can really allow the body to get in that perfect rhythm that the baby's going to need to have FER happen and baby come out. Avoid tensing up when the reflex kicks in, which I know is obviously hard to know when that's going to happen or prepare for that. The best way I have seen moms prepare for this to actually happen is to practice for a long time during pregnancy, at the very minimum 3 months before birth. This practice is laying in bed at night. It does not have to be laying in bed at night, but this is just what I've seen. Laying in bed at night and consciously relaxing every muscle from head to toe. At first, it might just feel like I'm relaxing my head, then I'm relaxing my shoulders, then my arms, then my mid back, then my low back, then my legs. And it might just feel chunky. That's okay. Eventually, it's going to be like, I'm going to relax the top of my ears and the bottom of my ears and the front of my neck and the sides of my neck, the back of my neck, the sides of my body, the sides of my arm, the under part of my arm. You're just going to start relaxing all these different parts of your body. When your body is so good at knowing how to relax, just actively relax, when we get into these really tense parts, that's going to be your most available tool in your toolbox to pull out and be like, I can relax my body right now. Like I've said, this is happening at the peak oxytocin, low adrenaline. Just because you have low adrenaline doesn't mean that these contractions aren't the most intense contractions you've felt all the way through labor up until now. They could be the most intense contractions. And at this point, you're typically losing a lot of energy and a lot of power to keep going. That's okay. Your body's going to have this overriding hormone and physiological event to push your baby out. So when you start to lose that energy, it's okay. Don't get completely defeated. Like, I don't know if I can keep doing this. I don't have any energy left. That's okay. Keep up with that rhythm. And this is easier said than done, but if you keep up with that rhythm, and even though your body's getting more and more tired, you're allowing oxytocin to keep rising and keep surging. And you're becoming deeper and deeper into your primal and parasympathetic state, where this can start to occur and your body's going to overload what you have available and push that baby out without any active effort. So if you're out of effort and your body overcomes it anyway and pushes the baby out, guess what? You got your baby and you don't have a ton of energy, but you're going to have a new surge of oxytocin and dopamine as soon as that baby comes out, which is going to bring a lot of energy back into you. So practice relaxing your head to toe as often, as frequently as you can, multiple times a day. Even if you could just do it at night, you can start practicing this the day that you find out you're pregnant. You can start practicing this now if you're not pregnant. This is just a really great practice of stepping out of sympathetic fight or flight response and into that rest, digest, parasympathetic state. Lastly, lean forward if possible. Go to all fours or use gravity. The leaning forward is helpful, not for everybody. I have been to a couple births where we spent a lot of time in positions where mom was leaning forward, or the weight was on the anterior front aspect of the cervix, and it actually did cause the cervix to swell quite a bit, creating a lip around baby's head. So we had to wait for the lip to unswell for baby to come out. So just keep that in mind. That's why changing positions all the time throughout labor is super important. If you have any rule of thumb going into labor, try to switch your position every 20 to 30 minutes. It can just help with swelling all around and allowing all the tissues to be prepared for baby to come out. Okay. We have done pretty fantastic. I'm going to read through a couple research case studies just so that you guys have something tangible to grasp onto, that this has happened with other people and other research. So first we have Dr. Michael Odent. He's done a lot of work on undisturbed births. Not a lot of people coming in, low lighting, warm, few people as the birth team. He has found that FER, or fetal ejection reflex, is most likely to occur when the neocortex, or the thinking brain, is quiet. So our thinking brain is what we keep alive most of our waking hours. We're turning that off. Or he's saying if you turn that off, or if it's at its all-time low, that's when fetal ejection reflex can happen. He's also found that bright lights, excessive monitoring, and unnecessary medical interventions suppress oxytocin, or that oxytocin surge, which in turn prevents FER from being able to happen. We have Dr. Shayla Kitzinger, I think I'm saying that right, research on physiological birth. She is a social anthropologist who studied birth around the world and observed fetal ejection reflex, most commonly in cultures where birth was seen as a natural, undisturbed process. In the United States, we do not typically view birth as a natural, undisturbed process. We see it as a medical event or a condition. So we tend to have different practices here, and that's why we tend to not see it as frequently here. So there are cultures around the world that are seeing this all the time. This is their norm for labor and birth. In contrast, like she says, like I just said, in Western hospitals where women are told to push on command, FER is almost non-existent because of the environmental disruption and hormonal flow disruption. Moving on. We have number 3, a 2019 study in the Journal of Midwifery and Women's Health. The researchers analyzed some spontaneous unmedicated births in homes and at birth centers, and found that FER was observed in over 60% of the cases where women were left undisturbed. Crazy. And undisturbed, I keep saying this, and I want to clarify, this is not a birth team not saying, you can do this, you've got this, mama, you are doing great. All of that is so helpful and actually does help moms, unless it's disturbing mom. Usually she's pretty clear, like, I need quiet. But undisturbed as in not telling, okay, now's the time to push. Okay, let's try to get an even harder push. That is considered disturbed to some degree. However, moving on. However, in hospital settings with continuous fetal monitoring and coach pushing, FER was only reported in about 10% of the cases. In conclusion, birth setting and provider approach significantly impacted the likelihood of FER occurring. Last one, we have physiological birth and perinatal outcomes, study done in 2021. This study looked at perineal outcomes, or tearing, and physiological versus coached pushing births. Results showed that births where FER occurred, there were significantly fewer severe perineal tears, like 3rd or 4th degree. Researchers believe that this is because FER allows the baby to descend at the body's natural pace, rather than being forced through prolonged coached pushing. So that all just validates everything we just went through. The last thing we're going to finish with is how to optimize your birth for FER. We've already talked about how to optimize your body for FER, or how to reduce tearing for FER, but how do we actually make a space suitable for FER to happen, since we've just talked about all these different things that can keep your body from engaging with this natural reflex. First, create a safe space. Create a private birth space if you can, whether it's at home or in a birth center. If it's in a hospital, minimize distractions or interruptions. Try to ask for the lights to be low or dimmed at least, and reduced excessive monitoring, which I know isn't always possible depending on the hospital you're in, depending on your conditions or your risk factors. Sorry, my hair just got stuck. I know you can't always not have monitoring, but if you are at a hospital that doesn't have to have monitoring, this can really help with your body's ability to stay in its natural rhythm. It's like having a phone up to your ear. Like, do you feel like you're in your natural rhythm when you're talking on the phone like this? Your body doesn't. If you do, maybe you need to reassess, but that's not natural for your body. Having sensors around your body while you're trying to push a baby out is not natural for your body, which is going to increase that sense of, even if it's subconscious, unsafety. So we want to make sure that the conscious and the subconscious feel completely safe. Second, work with your body, not against it. Trust your instincts and avoid coach pushing unless medically necessary. So we've talked about this through getting into instinctive positions. You can tell people, I don't want to be coached. You can tell your doula, tell people I don't want to be coached or told what to do. Like, I know how to do this. I'm going to, maybe even if you don't feel like you know how to do this, your body knows how to do this. Okay? I hope that when I go through these episodes, I hope that lands, that your body was meant to do this. Your body was designed to birth a baby. So let's work with it. Let's not work against it. Let's lean into the fact that hundreds of thousands of millions of moms have done this before us, because this is going to help us realize that we were meant to do this too. So work with your body, not against it. Try to include that practice of relaxing your body every night or multiple times throughout the day, so that when you get into this highly intense or emotional or physical event, that you can actually work with your body. You actually still have control because you have worked with it so much throughout pregnancy. Number 3 is stay mobile and change positions. I keep saying this. I feel like a record on repeat. Change positions, change positions, change positions, and let your body guide you into the position that feels best for birth. Even if it feels like the craziest position ever, let it guide you there. And if you get there and you're like, no, this feels awesome, great, you found your spot. If you get there and you're like, this is not feel good, you can change your position again. There's no limit on how many times you can change your position. I'll give another shout out to Dr. Molly Peralta, who I've shouted out before. She has shared her birth on Instagram. I'm not sure if it's still there, but you can see during her pushing, she gets into like 2 or 3 different positions in the actual baby coming out. I don't know if she is pushing actively in her brain or if she is allowing the fetal ejection reflex to happen. But you can see her get into different positions as the baby's head's out, she gets into a different position. Baby's still kind of pushing out as she's still getting into another position. And then as baby comes out, she finalizes in one more position. So you can change positions as often and as frequently as you would like, depending on also if you're being monitored. Sometimes when you're being monitored, or when your baby's being monitored, if they're being monitored and you get into a position that feels best for you, sometimes that's going to change their heart rate or change their response, which sometimes signals to nurses, labor and delivery nurses, OBs, midwives, that baby's in distress or baby is not tolerating this position, and so they'll move you out of it. When your baby's not being monitored, it's not that you're necessarily stressing out your baby, but you're more likely to be able to stay in that position and get your body to where it needs to be to support your baby even better. So keep that in mind if you're planning a hospital birth, that monitoring your baby might actually shift your ability to change positions. I've got 2 more. Keep oxytocin flowing. This one's so fun. What gets baby in is going to get baby out. So all the love touches, all the supportive head rubs, anything that feels good physically, have your birth partner do that. If maybe that's actually creating stress or like you're like, I don't want to be touched right now, don't do that. Try to find oxytocin in other ways. But a lot of times, the easiest way to get oxytocin flowing is through physical touch. So if you don't have a doula, I mean, you could have a doula shaking your hips and your spouse rubbing your arms or patting your head. You could have multiple people having hands-on. But if you don't have anyone specifically hands-on, get your birth partner involved, get your doula involved, see if your labor and delivery nurse might get involved. Usually that's kind of where their scope stops, but Get some more physical touch where you can. Even like a foot rub, a little foot massage will feel good. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Communicate to your birth team. I always say communicate to your birth team way before. Usually in your first or second prenatal appointment with a doula midwife team, you will be able to lay out all of your preferences, or at least print out a version of your preferences, so that they can be aware. If you don't have a doula, it's really imperative that you print out your birth preferences so that you and your spouse can advocate for those birth preferences throughout the entire labor and birth. If you have a doula, if you don't have a doula, I encourage you to think about getting a doula. If you have a doula, talk to them. As the more that they know about your preferences and how you want your environment, the more they can advocate for that for your birth. Like I said, maybe, I don't know if it's in the last episode or if it's coming out in a little bit, I am not a very confrontational person, but when I want something done, I want something done. So if it was me, I would be asking my doula, can you turn the lights off? Can you get the music going? Can you say, hey, we want less people in here? Your doula will totally do that. Most of them. This is important to find the doula that works best for you. But if you communicate those needs and what your vision of the birth space looks like, it's a lot easier for people to be on board and make that happen for you when you are focused on actually birthing your child. I want to hear more. So please share your stories. If you were close to this or you really wanted it and you can pinpoint where or why it didn't happen, if it happened for you and you were shocked by it or you just like weren't expecting it, like I want to hear that story too. So if you have any experience with fetal ejection reflex, please send me a DM. Please tell me your story. Other moms want to believe that this is an option, and it's hard to believe that this is an option when there's such little evidence or stories out there about it. So please share your stories. I would love to continue sharing more about the fetal ejection reflex on this podcast through shared experiences. So please share. And I'll just do a little shameless plug here since we've been talking about it for the majority of this episode, and I will continue to talk about different practices to have the best birth outcome for you and your family. We are doing a Better Birth Outcomes workshop at Move Chiropractic coming up in 2 weeks, March 28th or 29th. It's Saturday, whichever one that is, from 11 to 1, where we will actually go through all the different practices you could be implementing right now into your pregnancy for a better birth outcome. Our culture today is so far removed from the birth world. Most moms are walking into their birth as their first experience with birth. Our ancestors, moms are walking into their own first birth, or own first labor, birth, delivery, having been at 10, 20, 30, 40, hundreds of births growing up because it was just such part of their culture. So now that it's not so much in our culture, we need to practice. We need to figure out how we can have these better birth outcomes, even in a really medicalized and highly monitored society, when it comes to labor and birth. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, this is natural. This is a really natural occurrence when conditions are right. A lot of times we are so focused on the conditions of labor and birth that we don't ever get to this natural outcome because we've already altered so many of the conditions throughout labor and birth. So, better birth outcomes, we're going to go through all the different practices. I would love to see you there if you know any moms or expecting mamas in Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, surrounding areas that would be interested. It is a completely free workshop this time. And it's going to be super fun. And that is a wrap on today's episode of Fetal Ejection Reflex. If this blew your mind or opened your eyes to something completely new with labor, birth, pushing, please share with another mama-to-be. If you've been enjoying the Pops podcast, please subscribe so that you can see every episode when it comes out every Monday, or leave us a review. Anything is helpful, but whatever you feel called to do. And if you want even more education on birth, pregnancy, postpartum, anything in between or beyond, you can check out Move Moms at Move Chiropractic Boulder for more in-depth support for pregnancy and postpartum. That is where I am seeing my mamas, and that's where I really feel like I get to help moms the most, is when I get to be hands-on with them. So if that's you, if you're in the Boulder, Colorado or surrounding areas, or you know a mom who's in this area who could use help, send them our way and I would love to help them out. Otherwise, you can always check back in here every Monday for a new episode on more education, more information about pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and beyond. So stay informed, stay educated, keep moving towards the birth that you deserve. Thank you for listening to the Popped Podcast, and I will see you guys next week.